The first question always comes before you even put them on. Not, what do they do? Not, how powerful are they? The real question is simpler and more unsettling. What happens if information follows you instead of waiting in your pocket? That's the question RayNeo X2 quietly places in front of you the moment it rests on your face. And the reason this matters is because most wearables scream for attention. These don't, but what happens when silence becomes the feature? That's where things get interesting. The first thing you notice isn't the display. It's the absence of drama. No bright startup animation. No sound announcing its presence. The glasses wake up the same way a room wakes up when the lights come on slowly. Information appears only when something actually asks for it. And already, before you've even walked 5 steps, something feels different. Stick with me here, because this difference only becomes clearer the longer you live inside it. RayNeo X2 sits on your face like a reminder, not a command. The design doesn't disappear, and it doesn't try to. You're aware you're wearing technology, but it doesn't feel like a gadget begging for interaction. For a kid, this feels like wearing something secret. For an adult, it feels respectful. And that's a strange word to use for hardware. But it fits more than any spec ever could. As you step outside, the world doesn't shrink. That's important. Most devices pull your attention inward. Phones pull your head down. Earbuds pull sound inward. RayNeo X2 does the opposite. It keeps your head up, your eyes forward. When information appears, it doesn't replace reality. It layers on top of it, like someone quietly pointing something out instead of blocking your view to explain it. Navigation is a perfect example of this. But don't jump ahead yet, because the way it works matters more than the fact that it works. Directions don't demand that you stare at them. They don't flash, they don't fight your eyes. They exist in your field of view, calmly waiting for you to notice them. And that raises a question you don't expect to ask. How much effort do you usually spend just checking where you're going? Audio quietly joins the experience here, and this is where RayNeo X2 starts to reveal its personality. The open-ear speakers don't seal you off from the world. They don't shout instructions. The sound feels more like a whisper meant only for you. You hear the street, you hear people, and the glasses simply add context. Imagine a friend walking beside you, gently reminding you where to turn instead of someone yelling directions through headphones. That's the closest real-world comparison. And this matters, especially for older users. Awareness stays intact. You don't feel disconnected. For younger users, it feels almost magical, like the world itself is talking back. And right here, before we even talk about translation or notifications or connectivity, something becomes clear. RayNeo X2 isn't trying to capture your attention. It's trying to earn permission. But what happens when the environment gets louder? More chaotic? What happens when voices overlap, streets get crowded, and information competes for space? That's the moment where most wearables fall apart. And it's also the moment where RayNeo X2 shows its restraint. Not by doing more, but by knowing when to step back. Translation works the same way. When speech is clear, readable text appears in your view. When it isn't, it doesn't pretend. There's no false confidence, no overload. It either helps or it gets out of the way. For a child, this builds trust instantly. For adults, this honesty matters even more. You know what the system can do, and because of that, you know when not to rely on it. Phone connectivity happens quietly in the background. Once paired, it stays paired. No repeated rituals, no constant attention. The glasses don't mirror your phone endlessly. They filter it. Notifications don't arrive as noise. They arrive as relevance. And here's where you feel the shift, not technically, but emotionally. You become less reactive. You don't reach for your phone as often. Not because you're restricted, because you don't need to. But wait, what about comfort? What about wearing this for more than a few minutes? That question always hangs in the air with AR glasses, and you feel it early. Yes, the weight exists. You're wearing hardware. There's no illusion here, but the balance stays consistent. Pressure doesn't creep. Nothing sharp or distracting develops over time. This isn't invisibility, it's endurance. And endurance matters when something wants to live on your face. Now here's a detail most people overlook, and it changes how you behave more than any feature list. There is no camera, no recording lens pointing outward. And that absence does something powerful. Social tension disappears. You stop thinking about whether moments are being captured. Other people relax around you. eye contact stays normal. For parents, this matters. For public spaces, this matters. And for you, it removes a layer of self-consciousness you didn't realize you were carrying. This is where the story starts to turn. Because RayNeo X2 isn't flashy. It doesn't show off. And that's exactly why it feels different. But now comes the real test. Not how it feels in the first hour, but how it behaves when the novelty fades. And that's where wearables reveal their truth. So what happens the next morning, when excitement is gone and routine takes over? What changes and what stays exactly the same? The next morning doesn't announce itself with excitement, and that's exactly why it matters. The RayNeo X2 is still sitting where I left it, untouched, quiet, waiting. And before I even pick it up, something clicks in my head. I'm curious. Again, not in a reviewer way, not in a checklist way. In a habit-forming way. That's a dangerous place for any piece of technology to reach, because habits don't care about marketing. They only keep what actually fits. I put the glasses on. And once again, nothing dramatic happens. No alerts fighting for my eyes. No sound demanding attention. The display wakes up calmly, like it's saying, I'm here if you need me. And that tone sets the stage for the entire day. As I move through simple morning tasks, I start noticing the real difference between this and every other wearable I've used. With most devices, you feel like you're servicing the technology, charging it, checking it, responding to it. Here the relationship feels reversed. The RayNeo X2 doesn't ask for constant acknowledgement. It doesn't reward you with animations or punish you with missed prompts. It just exists alongside you. This is where age differences start to show up again in a very real way. A younger user slips into this experience almost instantly. There's no resistance. No second guessing. For them, floating information feels normal, almost obvious. Older users take a bit longer. They test boundaries. They wait to see if the glasses will interrupt them at the wrong time. But the interruption never comes. And slowly, that caution softens into comfort. Audio continues to play its quiet role. The open-ear design means the world never disappears. When a notification arrives, it doesn't hijack your focus. It feels more like someone lightly clearing their throat before speaking. And if you ignore it, nothing escalates. No repeated buzz. No insistence. That absence of pressure changes how long you're willing to wear the glasses. Hours pass without resentment building. Connectivity remains uneventful, which is actually a compliment. The RayNeo X2 stays connected to the phone without constant reminders. You don't think about pairing. You don't babysit the connection. And that reliability does something subtle but important. It removes friction from trust. You stop wondering if the system will be there when you need it. As the day gets busier, the real test begins. Crowds, noise, movement. This is where AR can either shine or completely collapse. And here's the twist. RayNeo X2 doesn't try to dominate chaos. It behaves conservatively. Information appears when it's relevant and backs off when it isn't. The display never feels crowded. The world still leads. The glasses follow. I test translation again, this time without planning it. A passing conversation. Mixed accents, uneven pacing, and the behavior stays consistent. When clarity exists, the translation appears. When it doesn't, the system steps aside. No guessing, no pretending. And because of that, trust deepens instead of breaking. You learn where the edges are, and the glasses respect those edges with you. This restraint shows up everywhere. Notifications don't stack endlessly. Navigation doesn't pull your eyes away from where you're going. Audio never competes with your surroundings. And slowly, something unexpected happens. You stop thinking about using the RayNeo X2. You start thinking about moving through your day with it. Comfort over extended wear becomes clearer now. The weight never vanishes, but it also never shifts. Pressure doesn't sneak up on you. The balance remains predictable. It's not something you forget entirely, but it's something you stop fighting. And in the world of wearables, that's often the difference between something you tolerate and something you keep. There's also a mental comfort that grows alongside the physical one. Without a camera, you stop curating your behavior. You're not thinking about capturing moments or how others might interpret the device. Interactions stay human. People talk to you normally. And you notice how rare that feeling has become around. Technology. By the afternoon, the RayNeo X2 has blended into the rhythm of the day. Not invisibly, but cooperatively. Information comes when it's useful. Silence fills the gaps. Battery awareness exists, but it doesn't dominate your thoughts. You plan around it the same way you plan around any tool. And that planning feels honest, not limiting. And this is where the bigger question starts forming naturally. Not as a comparison chart, not as a spec battle, but as a feeling. How does this kind of experience stack up against other smart glasses people already know? Especially the ones designed to disappear instead of assist? Because that's when expectations collide with reality. And that collision changes the entire conversation around smart glasses. That comparison doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, almost without permission. And once it does, you can't unsee the difference. The comparison doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in during ordinary moments, when you're not trying to evaluate anything at all. You're walking, talking, living, and suddenly your brain asks a simple question without warning. How does this feel around real people? That's the moment RayNeo X2 starts revealing what it actually is. Not as a product, but as a presence. I notice it when I walk into a small shop. The kind of place where space is tight, conversations are close, and eye contact matters. With the RayNeo X2 on my face, I'm aware of two things at the same time. I'm aware of the information quietly available to me. And I'm aware that others can see the technology. Some people don't react at all, some glance briefly, a few look curious. And that reaction, however small, becomes part of the experience. This is where RayNeo X2 makes no apologies. It does not try to disappear. It doesn't pretend to be just another pair of glasses. It exists honestly as a piece of technology. And that honesty creates a decision point. For some users, especially those who value blending in above all else, this visibility feels uncomfortable. For others, it feels refreshing. There's no performance, no hiding, just clarity, and this is exactly where Meta Ray-Ban lives on the opposite end of the spectrum. Meta Ray-Ban works because it looks familiar. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to manage reactions. People see glasses, not hardware. You move through the world without thinking about how the device appears socially. And for many people, that ease is the entire appeal. But when you mentally switch back to RayNeo X2, something interesting happens. You realize it's not competing on invisibility at all. It's competing on awareness. The AR display changes where information lives. Directions don't pull you down into your phone. They exist where your eyes already are. Text doesn't demand posture changes. It meets you in your natural field of view. That difference sounds subtle until you live with it. The longer the day goes on, the more you notice how often you normally break focus to check a screen. Every time that interruption doesn't happen feels unremarkable in isolation. But those moments accumulate. By evening, you don't feel energized. You feel steadier, less scattered. And that feeling is hard to quantify but impossible to ignore. Audio behavior deepens this contrast even further. With Meta Ray-Ban, audio is front and center. Music, calls, recordings. It's an active feature set. With RayNeo X2, audio plays a supporting role. It reinforces visuals instead of replacing them. Like someone whispering reminders instead of tapping your shoulder repeatedly. For a child, that feels almost magical. For an adult, it feels intentional. There's also a psychological shift in how control is perceived. Meta Ray-Ban feels reactive. It waits for commands. You tell it when to act. RayNeo X2 feels cooperative. It doesn't act constantly, but when it does, it feels situational. Not guessing. Not forcing relevance. Just responding when the moment allows it. And yet, this isn't about declaring one better than the other. Because they aren't solving the same problem. Meta Ray-Ban succeeds when you forget you're wearing technology. RayNeo X2 succeeds when you notice information without noticing effort. Those are completely different definitions of success. This difference becomes even clearer across age groups. Younger users don't carry decades of habits. They adapt quickly to visible tech. RayNeo X2 feels natural to them because it doesn't clash with established routines. Older users bring stronger expectations. For them, Meta Ray-Ban feels safer, familiar, less disruptive. Neither response is wrong. They're just honest reflections of different relationships with technology, and this is where disappointment usually comes from, expecting one philosophy while buying the other. People expect RayNeo X2 to vanish socially. It doesn't. People expect Meta Ray-Ban to surface information contextually. It doesn't. Once you accept what each one truly is, frustration disappears. As the day stretches on, I notice something. else forming quietly in the background. With RayNeo X2, my mind thinks in terms of flow, information timing, awareness. With Meta Ray-Ban, my mind thinks in terms of moments, capturing, listening, recording. One organizes experience. The other documents it. That mental distinction matters more than specs ever will. And here's the twist: most reviews miss entirely. The longer you wear RayNeo X2, the less interesting it becomes to show off. The novelty fades fast. What's left is usefulness or the lack of it. And that's the real test. Not whether it impresses someone else, but whether it earns space in your routine when no one is watching. That answer doesn't arrive quickly. It shows up quietly when you stop thinking about the glasses altogether. And when that moment comes, you realize you've crossed from evaluation into habit. Because once novelty fades, only one thing matters. Not how smart the glasses are, but how they fit into who you already are. And that realization pulls everything together, setting up the final question that actually matters in real life. By the time you reach the final stretch of living with the RayNeo X2, something quietly shifts. You stop thinking about what it can do and start noticing what happens when it's not there. And that realization doesn't arrive with excitement. It doesn't announce itself, it arrives in silence. One ordinary morning, you step outside without putting the glasses on, and for a split second, your eyes expect something that never appears. No subtle guidance hovering in your view. No contextual hint waiting patiently, just the raw world, exactly as it always was. And that tiny pause, barely even conscious, ends up saying more than any review ever could. Because habits don't lie. That pause reveals that something had quietly settled into your behavior without asking permission. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that demanded loyalty. But in a way that simply made certain moments smoother, and now, without it, those moments feel slightly incomplete. Nothing breaks. Nothing fails. You can still navigate. You can still think. But the absence is noticeable, and that's the difference between novelty and integration. This is where the real verdict forms. Not in side-by-side comparisons, not in feature lists, not in spec sheets, but in behavior. RayNeo X2 never tries to turn you into a different person. It doesn't demand that you change how you live or how you move. It doesn't push new rituals into your day. Instead, it gently reshapes how information meets you. When it's there, things feel marginally smoother. When it's gone, nothing collapses, but something feels slightly less supported. And that balance is incredibly hard to achieve in technology. I think back to the first hours of wearing the RayNeo X2, when every interaction felt deliberate. Every prompt felt like a test. Every moment triggered analysis. I was watching it closely, measuring reactions, anticipating flaws. But that phase fades quickly. What replaces it is routine. And routine is unforgiving. Routine doesn't care about good intentions or clever ideas. Routine exposes flaws without drama. If something is irritating, routine amplifies it until you can't ignore it. If something is confusing, routine turns it into fiction. And if something is useful, truly useful, routine keeps it quietly, without applause. RayNeo X2 survives that test in a very specific way. It doesn't dominate the day. It doesn't ask to be admired. It supports the flow of the day without demanding acknowledgement, and that subtlety is rare. The weight never disappears completely. You always know you're wearing technology. There's no illusion here. This isn't eyewear pretending to be nothing more than style. But the weight also never sneaks up on you. It doesn't create pressure points that suddenly demand removal. Long sessions remind you to be aware, not uncomfortable. The balance remains predictable. The pressure doesn't migrate or concentrate. This isn't invisibility, it's endurance. And when something is meant to sit on your face, endurance matters far more than first impressions. The display continues to behave with the same patience it showed on day one. It doesn't fight your eyes, it doesn't rush you. It doesn't insist that you notice it. It waits. And over time, that waiting becomes part of the experience. You stop expecting information to appear constantly. You start trusting that it will appear when it matters. That trust removes anxiety instead of creating it. There's a calm that comes from knowing you're not going to miss something important simply because you weren't checking a screen. Not because the glasses promise perfection, but because they've earned credibility through consistency. When something appears, it feels earned. When nothing appears, it feels intentional. That distinction changes how you move through the day. Battery awareness becomes part of the rhythm as well. Not in a stressful way. Not in a way that dominates your planning. Just consciously. You learn when RayNeo X2 fits your schedule, and when it doesn't, you stop expecting it to carry you through everything. And strangely, that limitation feels honest rather than frustrating. Like knowing the fuel range of a car before a long drive. You're not guessing, you're deciding. And that decision-making reinforces agency. The glasses don't pretend to be endless. They don't hide their boundaries behind vague optimism. They exist within limits, and those limits are visible enough to respect. That honesty creates trust, not disappointment. What stands out most, as days blend together, is restraint. RayNeo X2 could easily overwhelm your vision with data. It doesn't. It could demand your attention more aggressively. It refuses to. In a world where every screen competes to be louder, brighter, and more urgent, this restraint feels deliberate, almost mature. The glasses don't try to decide what matters for you. They wait for you to decide and then support you when needed. That restraint changes your relationship with information itself. You stop thinking of data as something that must constantly be consumed. Instead, it becomes something that arrives, situationally relevant, temporary, and then gone. That rhythm feels closer to how the human brain actually works. When you contrast that one last time with Meta Ray-Ban, the difference finally crystallizes. Meta Ray-Ban disappears into life. RayNeo X2 integrates into it. One becomes invisible. The other becomes supportive. Neither approach is universally better. They simply serve different personalities, different comfort zones, different expectations. If you want technology that stays out of sight, that captures moments quietly, that never challenges social expectations, Meta Ray-Ban makes sense. It feels familiar, reliable, predictable. It asks nothing new from you. It blends into what you already know. If you want information where you're already looking, if you value awareness over aesthetics, if you're comfortable letting technology assist rather than hide, RayNeo X2 makes its case clearly. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It introduces itself honestly, as a tool meant to sit visibly between you and information, and that honesty is its strength. By the end of this experience, it doesn't feel like I tested a gadget. It feels like I spent time with a philosophy. A philosophy about where technology belongs, not locked in pockets, not glued to hands, not demanding posture or attention, but quietly supporting vision. Present without being intrusive. And that's the reality of our smart glasses right now. They're not here to replace phones. They're not here to impress everyone. They're here to serve specific lives, specific habits, specific ways of thinking. They don't promise universality. They offer alignment. So when someone asks, does the RayNeo X2 actually make sense? The answer isn't a yes or no. It depends less on the glasses and more on the person asking. If you want tech that hides, you already know where to look. If you want tech that helps you see without shouting, without demanding, RayNeo X2 stands confidently where it is, and that's where this story ends. Not with a winner, but with clarity. Because once you understand what you truly want from smart glasses, the decision stops being complicated. And if grounded, real-world tech stories like this help you cut through the noise, you already know this journey doesn't stop here. I'll see you in the next one.